on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. The next senator representing Michigan could shift the balance of power in Washington, and their policies relating to the auto industry, tariffs, and electric vehicles could make Michigan's economic interests a pivotal one nationwide. The four main candidates are Abdul El-Sayed, Haley Stevens, Mallory McMorrow, and Mike Rogers. They're all vying to replace Gary Peters. The domestic auto industry has been on an economic roller coaster, ping-ponging tariff policies with U.S. competitors and allies, and rollbacks of Biden-era electric vehicle tax rebates. Where it all goes will tell us a lot about where the U.S. economy is going. So, what policies might the next senator from Michigan bring to Washington? Molly Boygun is a reporter who covers technology and innovation for Automotive News. She spoke to the four candidates on the Daily Drive podcast and just published a piece breaking down where they stand on key automotive economic policies. She joins me now. Molly, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
So the auto industry touches nearly every part of the U.S. economy. We here in the Motor City know this well, from manufacturing to energy to trade. Talk about how large that footprint is today and where you see its influence most clearly.
The auto industry is the country's most important manufacturing sector. We have, significant domestic automakers, and there's also a move by foreign automakers to move manufacturing back to the U.S. as it has been prompted by moves from President Trump. It's a industry that intersects with labor, with the environment, with foreign policy, and with so many other things. And it's just absolutely crucial to the health of the country and to the health of the state of Michigan.
Now, there were two themes that emerged in your interviews with candidates: tariffs and electric vehicles. I want to start with tariffs. We've followed the tariffs throughout the year, and it's been quite apparent that the uncertainty and economic pressures on Canada specifically have a real impact on our economy here in Southeast Michigan. So I'm wondering, what did the Michigan Senate candidates tell you about tariffs?
So we spoke to four candidates, as you mentioned in the intro, three of which were Democrats and one of which was a Republican. The Democrats aligned pretty well on criticizing the administration for, first of all, the kind of chaotic nature of the tariffs, going back and forth, issuing a proclamation and then issuing clarifications and, negotiating and then reissuing proclamations. And also they criticized the reciprocal tariffs, which were issued country by country. And, in particular, the candidates said that smart tariff policy would be more targeted. One candidate, Abdul El-Sayed, compared it to chemotherapy. And basically, the criticism was that the country-by-country tariffs were sort of without care and without a targeted, focused approach.
If you think about NAFTA as cancer, then, a doctor will tell you that you need chemotherapy. But every doctor will also tell you that chemotherapy is poison, but you're trying to kill the tumor instead of killing the human being, because if you don't, then the human being dies of the cancer. So you got to be very, very targeted, very, very specific, and very good at communicating with your patient when and how you are going to transmit this chemotherapy.
Okay, so kind of a dark analogy there from Abdul El-Sayed, but he is a doctor and has served as a top health official in both Detroit and Wayne County here. So perhaps not surprising to hear a strong medical analogy from the doctor. Criticism of NAFTA or the North American Free Trade Agreement is shared by Democrats and Republicans nowadays. Is there anything that sets El-Sayed and his view of tariffs apart from his Democratic colleagues?
I would say that he was actually, interestingly, a lot of the Democratic candidates had personal ties to the auto industry. He probably criticized NAFTA in the clearest terms, but all of the candidates are walking a really challenging line in Michigan because of this very strong labor representation in Michigan, the importance of the auto industry in Michigan, the cost that Michigan has paid for these free trade agreements. And I will say also, while the Democrats were criticizing the tariff approach by the Trump administration, Mike Rogers, who's a Republican, did not. He was saying, that the tariff approach has been effective, that something like this, as chaotic or as erratic as it may be, is important for bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. and really preserving the middle class.
We've lost 30,000 manufacturing jobs since 2019. And so when you look at that, that tells you we have a problem. And China has been eating our lunch on supply chains, on critical minerals. And so all of this helps realign to make sure that Michigan working families and American working families are manufacturing again.
Okay, so we're hearing Mike Rogers repeat a message that is espoused by Trump and his administration. Of course, he's going to back up the president's tariffs. He's been endorsed by Trump. We've had a handful of people who know the auto industry well, including folks from Auto News, who pointed to tariff chaos as a problem for the auto industry, certainly the uncertainty of those tariffs as well, including the smaller local companies in the supply chain. Now, when you spoke with Mike Rogers, did he offer any criticisms or concerns about how Trump's on-again, off-again tariffs were affecting businesses here?
He did not. He really did sort of take the line that the president has been towing and talked about, as I mentioned, the necessity of tariffs to preserve the middle class, and also spoke a lot about China and how, as painful as that may be, the auto industry needs to extricate itself from China, and basically sort of undermining or underplaying the concerns that the industry has had, because he views it as so important that the industry extricate itself from Chinese parts manufacturing.
Okay, I want to think about one aspect in particular of the auto industry that you cover a lot, and that is robotics. How are tariffs going to impact the development of robotics in U.S. auto manufacturing? Because that's going to have an effect on the innovation and the technology of automobiles.
Yes. A couple of weeks ago, the government released a Federal Register notice that let people know that it had begun an investigation in the month of September into Section 232 tariffs on robotics and industrial manufacturing equipment. So that Section 232 has been underlying all of the tariffs related to national security. These are the tariffs that the government claims are necessary to shore up domestic manufacturing of a particular component or part or good, basically to protect national security. So the government is investigating robotics and industrial manufacturing equipment tariffs. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be implemented, but if they are, this is a really interesting challenge for the auto industry, because the Trump administration is focused on onshoring domestic manufacturing. In order to do that, the companies have to also invest in robotics and industrial machinery. So it's sort of a 1-2 punch of, not only are we asking you to return your manufacturing to the United States to avoid tariffs on imported goods, but now also the cost of the equipment that you need to manufacture those goods is going to increase unless you can source them from the United States.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. If you're just joining us, my guest is Molly Boygan, a reporter who covers technology and innovation for Automotive News. We're talking about where Senate candidates stand on auto industry policies, with Republicans holding a slim majority in the Senate. Whoever succeeds Gary Peters could have a big impact in Washington and here in Michigan. Molly, I want to stay on innovation in the industry, and specifically, I want to look at electric vehicles. The transition to EVs seemed inevitable and fast approaching during the Biden administration. I mean, battery technology improved, investment in research and development by auto companies went up. We saw this growing EV infrastructure all over the country and certainly here in Metro Detroit. A big part of those gains were attributable, at least in part, though, to tax credits on electric vehicles. And under Trump, those tax credits are now gone. They ended at the end of September. And we're seeing the ramifications in the bottom lines of the big three auto companies. So what effect did those credits going away have on GM, Ford, and Stellantis's business?
The end of the tax credits, the data for sales and registrations after the end of the tax credits isn't available yet. The industry prediction is that we'll see there was a pull through where people were attempting to sort of slide in under the wire of the tax credit and purchase their electric vehicles. And there may be a little bit of a long tail for that too, because it's technically that the credit you're eligible for the credit if you sign your documents before September 30th, even if you take delivery after the 30th. So there may be a little bit of a long tail for that, but there is an expectation that the end of the tax credit is going to peter off the electric vehicle adoption rate a little bit. However, the people that I've spoken to say that it's not really going to fall off a cliff because the people who wanted EVs want them anyway. And there's also a sort of counterintuitive effect of the elimination of the tax credit. There was a perception, in particularly in conservative circles, that the Biden administration was sort of forcing electric vehicles down the consumer's throat. And with the end of the tax credit, it's a little bit of a softening of that argument. And so I, for example, spoke to BJ Birtwell, who's the CEO of Electrify Expo, who said perhaps the end of the tax credit will also sort of ease some of the politicization that has dogged EV adoption in conservative circles.
That's interesting. So in other words, electric vehicles under the Biden administration almost became a partisan issue. And now folks within the industry are saying perhaps this could be a good thing and people will no longer view electric vehicles as something good for Democrats versus Republicans.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, it's really interesting the way that EVs have been politicized. And this actually came up also in a conversation that I was having with the Senate candidate, Haley Stevens, that the perception was that the Biden administration was pushing electric vehicles on the consumer. And in fact, you know, the Inflation Reduction Act tax credit was established in 2022, which was after some of the automakers had already announced their electric vehicle targets. So Haley Stevens had a sort of unique perspective in that she was sort of defending the Biden administration and highlighting that manufacturers had made promises prior to the establishment of the 2022 tax credit.
Let's listen to Representative Stevens.
Frankly, this narrative about policymakers driving the entire conversation misses that General Motors over and over and over again said that they were going to net zero emissions by 2030. And certainly with things that I, have worked on in the past alongside our auto industry, I, as a policymaker, only want to continue to set an environment where the free market thrives for the American consumer.
Okay, so Representative Stevens is essentially putting the onus on companies, not elected officials.
Yes, and I think, this is also a person who's sort of navigating some of the political considerations of the situation, but I do think there's some legitimacy to this perspective. I did a story about the end of the tax credit, and the first tax credit was established during George H.W. Bush's administration. So while the Biden administration sort of takes the heat for the establishment of the tax credit, there's a long history of different parties, either sort of leading the charge on incentivizing clean vehicle adoption, or at least going along with it as their legislative bodies bring that to the table.
Sure. And I mean, State Senator Mallory McMorrow, she echoed the free market argument as well, but she offered a more tempered alternative.
I think the credit should have remained in effect, probably not for that much longer, but maybe phased out gradually over the next couple of years, because we are reaching that tipping point where there are enough vehicles in the market. The adoption rate is increasing. And it always should have been viewed as a temporary carrot, knowing that over time, as more and more of these things are produced, that the cost was going to come down for consumers.
Okay, so we just heard Senator McMorrow's more middle ground approach. Get rid of tax credits, but spread the change out over a longer time. Does that set her apart from the field at all?
Yes and no. I think the tax credit was always planned to basically bridge the gap as natural consumer demand increased and the cost of manufacturing the vehicles decreased. I think there was also, in the process of negotiating the One Beautiful Bill Act, which was the Trump administration's significant tax and spending law, there was a lot of industry folks that I spoke to expected the tax credit to go away once the Trump administration took power. It was just a matter of how quickly. And the September 30th deadline was basically the quickest option. There was another proposal on the table to end the tax credit at the end of the year. I do think that Senator McMorrow, State Senator McMorrow, is touching on a really important point, which again speaks to my point earlier that the expectation is not that sales and registrations are going to fall off a cliff, because some of these sort of barriers to adoption have naturally ebbed over time. You have the price of electric vehicles falling. You have battery tech improving.
That's right. Molly, this is an interesting time to be reporting on automotive news. Molly Boygan is a reporter who covers technology and innovation for Automotive News. She spoke with the four main candidates running to be Michigan's next senator on the Daily Drive podcast. Molly, thanks for your reporting.
Thank you so much.
Coming up, two Detroit City Council candidates make their pitch for why they should represent part of the city ahead of the November election. That's next on the Metro. Stay with us.